My name's John Maywalt. I'm with the Blue Ridge Partnership for Regional Invasive Species Management, Blue Ridge PRISM. We deal with invasive plants here in the state of Virginia. And you can see I'm surrounded here by autumn olive, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Here we're seeing olive on the forest edge. It likes to grow on edges, but it's perfectly happy to grow in full sun out in the meadow or in deep shade in the forest. Basically, it'll grow anywhere. This plant came to us from East Asia, Eastern China, Korea, Japan in the 19th century. And there was a point where the Department of Agriculture was giving it away to be used for mining, strip mining reclamation areas and for stream bank stabilization, because it has a tenacious root system, which has implications for how we're going to manage it. And that's what we're going to talk about today shortly, is controlling this plant. Its impacts, some of them are visual. I mean, you can see behind me that it's taking up a lot of space which would normally be occupied by dogwoods and redbuds and a variety of grasses, forbs, and other woody native plants, but it's here. So there's that much less native plants that are available for native wildlife to consume. So that's one of its primary impacts. If we took a look at these leaves in late November, there's not a single bite out of them. Nothing eats it. Now it does produce food in the form of small red speckled berries in the fall, and they're very attractive to birds, but they're kind of junk food. They're all sugar. There's no protein, there's no fats in them, so they really don't have much value to wildlife. And the third aspect about their impacts on the ecosystem, significant impacts, they're nitrogen fixers. So nitrogen fixation is great. The soil needs nitrogen, but you can see there's so much of it, the soil is getting way too much. It's changing the chemical makeup of the soil here, which is making it more difficult for native plants to survive in close proximity to them. So it's shading them out, it's chemically changing the soil. It needs to go. So we're going to talk about how to make it go. And we're going to put the approaches to controlling it into two packages. Those techniques that don't require herbicide and those that do. So let me go through a number of techniques that you can use to control this plant, or try to control this plant, without the use of herbicide. And one of the things that people who work with herbicides a lot try to do is to not use herbicides, even if they're herbicide users. To the extent that we can, we try not to use them. And one of the standard techniques that we use is to take small plants, small versions of the plant, and hand pull them. You don't have to use herbicide for it. The problem is you can't hand pull this plant. If it's anything more than 3 or 4 inches tall, it has such an extensive root system that if you try to hand pull it, even after rainfall and the soil is nice and moist and lubricated well, even if you wiggle it and all you want to wiggle it, it's just going to break off. So hand pulling really doesn't work well. You can try to assist your hand pulling a little bit with a hand mattock like this, and just dig in on the far side of the plant and try to pry it up, dig all the way around it. You can use a shovel and try to shovel it out. The problem with those techniques is it's unlikely you're going to get all the roots, and if you leave much of the root system in the ground, it will regrow from it. It has a really strong tendency to be able to regrow from partial roots. Other techniques that don't require herbicide would include mowing. So if you have a lot of less than, say, an inch and a quarter diameter saplings growing in a meadow, you can mow it with a bush hog, for instance. And that's going to top kill it. It'll kill everything above ground, but again, it's going to grow back. So it's an activity that you would have to repeat probably 2 or 3 times in a growing season. So here we are in June. Right now, if you had stuff coming up, there's some of it around us that's maybe this tall. That's good stuff for mowing, but by mid-July you need to mow again. And then by late August, early September, you'd need to mow again, because top killing without affecting the roots doesn't kill it systemically, it's going to grow back. Another mechanism is grazing. Goats. Goats will eat the leaves. That's great, but again, it's a top kill. Even if they ate every leaf off this, the plant would have to start over, and it would sprout new leaves. If we did if they grazed in June, by late July, early August, it would have full leaves again because there's stored energy in the roots. So it's going to grow back. So you have to bring the goats back out and let them eat again. In order to use goats for the grazing approach, you need to have a person who's experienced in using goats for vegetation management. And it has to be done repeatedly, just like mowing is going to have to be done repeatedly. Because if you only kill the top stuff and don't get the roots, it's going to grow back. If you have an area like this where it's just dense with it, and we're seeing it very dense right here, if it had outcompeted 90% or more of the natives, there's another machine that you can use. It's called a forestry mulcher, and it's a treaded vehicle, and across the front of it, it has a big drum, about a 3-foot tall drum that runs the width of the machine, and it has big 4-inch teeth on it, and it digs into the ground and will dig in about 4 inches. It'll do up to 3-inch pieces, stems, and just grind them in the mulch, and that's all you have left is mulch. Again, it's a top kill, so it's going to grow back, but what's going to grow back is going to be this kind of stuff instead of this kind of stuff. So that's the kind of approach that you roll out when you've lost the game, when the olive has beaten you and taken out all or virtually all of your natives. The most common technique without the use of herbicide that's used for controlling trees of bushes of this size is just to cut them. And for cutting, there's a whole variety of tools you can use to make your cut, starting with, if it's just a little guy, you're using your pruning shears. If it's a little bit bigger than that, you're going to start moving up through saws. And here's your standard 1-foot long pruning saw. For stuff that's as big as this, you're probably going to want to use a bigger saw, like that. That's a 15-incher. That'll handle anything up to 3 or 4 inches or more. You can use folding saws. They're a little bit easier for you to carry with you. And that's a 7-inch blade, so that'll cut a pretty good sized piece. You can use loppers, and they're going to be able to do maybe 1.5 inches, 1 3/4 inches, and then you're into the saw again. And then there's power assisted tools. This is what's called a mini chainsaw. It has a 4-inch bar, a 6-inch bar, so it'll cut a pretty big piece, and it saves you a lot of energy. If you look around here, there are 100 of these. That's a lot of cutting with a handsaw. So a mini chainsaw or a full-size chainsaw is a good tool to use, and I'll demonstrate a couple of these in just a moment. Okay, so the most common non-herbicide supported technique in the physical and mechanical category is simply cutting. So we're going to cut this down, and I'll show you how we like to do it. We're going to get down right close to the ground, because when we take it down, we don't want to leave a stub. It's something for you to trip over if you're trying to move through the forest. So I'm right down at ground level, and I'm going to make my cut. And that's that. So again, this is pretty small, pretty easy to do with a handsaw. As they get larger and larger, you're probably going to be going to some kind of mechanized assisted cutter like a chainsaw. Okay, so we're going to transition to talking about herbicide assisted techniques shortly. I'll show you a drip bottle, which is a way to apply herbicide. And it just has a little pop-up top and lets you drip your herbicide onto that outer edge, like that. That's all it takes, is just a tiny amount. And now it's going to be absorbed down in the roots by gravity. And we'll kill the plant. All right, so there's a drip bottle and a dauber. And the other applicator, and this is the one that's used much more commonly, is simply a spray bottle, where you just kind of give it a little spray. And that's it. So let me show you two other techniques that are herbicide assisted, and we'll look at what kind of applicators you can use for it. And this next one is called hack and squirt. And what we're going to do is hack into this trunk with a hatchet, some people use a machete, and create an opening into the vascular system. And then we're going to drip our herbicide into that opening. Now, you don't have to do this down at ground level. It's going to get down there. So the reason why I'm showing you this technique is it's a lot less effort than having to saw through these stems. You just do this, and you're done. So I created two hacks there, which opened up the vascular tissue enough for me to take either my drip bottle, stick the nozzle right into that hack, and just put a couple drops in, or take my spray bottle, stick the nozzle right into the hack, and just give it a gentle spray. That stem is dead. So this technique of hack and squirt is the one that's most popular with foresters and people who do this kind of work for pay, because it's so much less effort, it uses less herbicide, it's faster, and you can use it on any stem from about this size up to the largest tree. So you use this for a tree of heaven, mimosa, paulownia, Norway maple, and the other invasive trees. Just in those cases, you would put a hack in, leave some space, put another hack in, leave some space, put another hack in, all the way around the trunk. You leave the space in order to leave some viable vascular tissue, because if you cut it all, the tree's going to go, it's going to know I'm dead, because it can't move liquids up or down anymore, and it's going to start root sprouting. So that's why you leave some space. Okay, so now I'm going to show you the third technique that's herbicide assisted, and it's called basal bark treatment. And it's called that because you apply the herbicide to the bark at the base of the tree or the shrub. And I'm not actually going to do this, and I'll explain why in just a moment, but you would take your sprayer, usually you're using a backpack sprayer for this, and you simply spray from about a foot to 18 inches above ground down to ground level. Spray, release, spray, release, spray, release, all the way around. Now the reason I'm not doing it is because in order to make this technique work, you have to use an oil-based herbicide. This is a water-based herbicide. Almost all the herbicides that are typically used in invasive work are water-based. But when you're trying to get the herbicide to stick to the bark long enough to be able to be absorbed in through it, you need oil to make it stick. This is kind of hard today because there's so much lower growth on these trees. If you do this in winter, it's a lot easier, particularly basal bark and hack and squirt, because the structure of the tree is exposed. You can see it better. The leaves are all off. You can get at it better. The temperature is a lot lower. You're not sweating like I am. It's kind of warm today. You don't have insects, you don't have ticks, you don't have snakes, and the whole thing that you have. And a lot of the undergrowth has died back. A lot of the native plants have receded. So you have a good isolated target and don't have to worry as much about being super careful, although you always want to be, with your herbicide application. So winter's a great time. What comes after winter is this plant comes out of dormancy and starts leafing out. Herbicides don't work when a tree is leafing out because all of the movement in the vascular system is upward. So we apply the herbicide and want it to go downward into the roots, and it can't get there because the force of liquids upward is so strong in the spring as it's breaking bud, leafing out. So you have to wait until it's leafed out before you start to apply herbicide again. Okay, so we've been through the most common non-herbicide techniques and herbicide-assisted techniques. We didn't have much time to talk about personal protective equipment and safety. Those are really important aspects. If you're using herbicide, read the label. Now, for everything we did here today, a really good source for more information and follow-up information is Blue Ridge PRISM, and their website is blueridgeprism.org. You can write to info@blueridgeprism.org, with any question that you have related to invasives. You can also get on their mailing list, which is pretty important because we put out what are called weed alerts. At given times of the year, it's just the right time to deal with one plant or another. And we send you those notes and say, hey, if you haven't gotten your stiltgrass under control yet, now's the time. Or don't try dealing with olive right now because it's leafing out. So get on our mailing list, info@blueridgeprism.org. Thank you.